Have you ever awakened to a peculiar void, even when your external world seems perfectly stable and complete? A feeling that things once so vital, your work, cherished relationships, or beloved hobbies, suddenly feel constricting and alien. As if you're wearing a garment that no longer fits, and an inner intuition whispers a vague fear. It seems I'm slowly fading away. Carl Jung, the profound psychologist of the human soul, didn't call this a breakdown or a crisis. He called it the summons of the self, a sacred moment when the social mask, persona, begins to crack, allowing your most authentic being to step into the light. That feeling of displacement is, in truth, the necessary birth pangs of a soul being reborn. But here's the frightening truth. Our rational minds often mistake this sacred metamorphosis for a failure. We panic as old beliefs crumble. We desperately cling to the past, and unwittingly stifle the most radiant phase, just beginning to blossom. We fear dissolution, forgetting that without the dissolving of the old, the new will never find space to form. In this video, I will share with you 7 subtle yet powerful signs confirming that the turmoil you're feeling is, in fact, the dawn of the most magnificent chapter of your life. And pay special attention to sign number 7, a paradoxical state most people fear and flee from, yet it holds the golden key to the true peace you've been yearning for. 1. When intuition becomes stronger than thought. Have you ever experienced that strange moment when you no longer know why something feels right, you just know? A vague feeling, yet so powerful it makes you pause in the middle of your thoughts, as if someone gently touched your shoulder and whispered, "Go this way." It isn't the noise of fear, nor the call of expectations, but a very distinct kind of calm, one that never feels like compromise. And what's even more remarkable is that you feel it becoming clearer and clearer. You stand before a choice, and instead of dissecting every possibility, you simply take a deep breath and feel your heart leaning in a certain direction, a direction you never planned for, never thought about, and cannot even explain to anyone else. Yet something quiet inside your chest begins to solidify into confidence. It doesn't boast. It doesn't need approval. It simply exists, like an old friend returning after a long silence. And do you know what's interesting? Even if you're not used to trusting your intuition because your whole life you relied on logic, on everything must have a reasonable explanation, you still hear it more clearly each day. Even when you try to ignore it, it knocks. Even when you try to rationalize it away, it stands there, calm, patient, neither pushing nor threatening, just inviting. This is the moment many people experience right before entering the best stage of their lives. Intuition suddenly becomes stronger than thought. This is not an illusion, and it is certainly not impulsiveness. The change in you is not an illusion. Your intuition grows stronger because you are moving in the right direction. This simple truth is the key to understanding the first sign. The closer you get to your true self, the louder that inner voice becomes. It never screams, it whispers, but it is the kind of whisper you cannot mistake. In Jungian psychology, there is a famous quote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." This is not advice. It is the operating mechanism of the soul. Only when you begin to look inward into the spaces between your thoughts, into the feeling in your chest, when something is right, do you begin to truly awaken. Awakening is not as grand as the movies make it seem. It feels more like recognizing your own voice for the first time. Not the voice you use to please others, but the voice of the deepest part of you, the part Jung called the self. When the self begins to rise, you feel a very specific kind of confidence. Not confidence because you know what will happen, but because you know what belongs to you. Let me tell you a small story, one you may recognize in yourself. You're at work. There's a new project. Everyone is excited. Logic tells you, join it. It's good for your career. It makes sense. But just as you are about to say yes, something in your chest slows down. It says, not this one. No concrete reason. No clear evidence. Just a feeling. A quiet refusal. You might ignore it. You might let the logical arguments convince you. But months later, when the project runs into trouble, you remember that moment. Your intuition warned you long before you realized you wanted safety, approval, or to avoid conflict. And when that happens, for the first time you understand, your intuition never betrayed you. On the contrary, it was you who betrayed yourself by not listening long enough, Or take love, an example almost everyone has lived through. You meet someone kind, stable, easy to talk to, everything looks right on paper. Yet somehow, your heart doesn't open. You try to reason with yourself. Maybe I need more time. Maybe I'm asking for too much. But each time you meet them, there is a heavy silence you cannot name. Later, when things eventually fall apart, you look back and realize you knew from the beginning. Your intuition told you, you just didn't trust it. Because all your life you were taught that logic is trustworthy, while feelings are unreliable. But what Carl Jung saw, what many people only realize after a profound psychological transformation, is this: intuition is not a fleeting emotion. Intuition is the ancient memory of the soul. It is the accumulated intelligence within your unconscious, the very thing Jung called the wisdom of the self. And once the self begins to rise, you cannot return to the way you used to live. That is why you start noticing something unmistakable. No matter how much you think, your body leans in a certain direction. No matter how many pros and cons lists you write, your heart still arrives at a different conclusion. And what's astonishing is this: that conclusion usually brings peace, not temporary excitement. But intuition does more than simply point the way. It awakens the flame of transformation inside you. Have you ever suddenly felt the urge to change everything? The way you live, the way you love, the way you work, the way you treat yourself? Not out of boredom, but because you sense that your current version of yourself is only surviving, not living. As if something within you whispers, "It's time." That is the energy of the self, not loud, not forceful, just a gentle invitation. Become who you truly are. And when you look closely, you'll see that this flame is not the heat of rebellion, but a quiet invitation, a soft touch guiding you back to yourself. So, what should you do when your intuition becomes stronger than your thoughts? The first and most important thing is to trust it just once, even in the smallest way. You don't need to make a grand decision. Simply try listening to it in a tiny choice. Take this path or that one. Speak a truth or remain silent. Meet someone or decline. Each time you listen, the self grows stronger. And each time you ignore it, the persona grows stronger. Which one are you feeding? The second thing, observe the signals in your body. Intuition is not a floating feeling. It has its own language: your heartbeat, your breath, the contraction or expansion of your chest, the warmth or chill in your lower belly. The body always knows before the mind. And before we continue, there is one thing you must hold tightly, because it is the core message of this first sign. The change in you is not an illusion. Your intuition grows stronger because you are moving in the right direction. You are not suddenly becoming too sensitive. You are not overthinking. You are not making a big deal out of nothing. You are getting closer to your true self. And the truth is, there is no compass in life stronger than the call of the self. When the self leads the way, you don't need to see the whole path. You only need to take one step. Because in Jungian psychology, even a single step toward your true essence is more powerful than 1,000 steps toward someone else's expectations. If this first sign is appearing in your life, take heart. It doesn't just mean you are changing, it means you are awakening. And awakening is the very first step toward entering the most radiant stage of your life. 2. When you no longer resemble the person you used to be, there are phases in life when you look back and feel as if you are living inside a shirt that has become too tight. Everything around you looks the same: the job you once took pride in, the relationships that used to feel close, the hobbies that once excited you, yet somehow, all of it suddenly fades like a movie you have watched too many times. And the strange part is, you don't know why. You only know that what once energized you now feels empty. Old identities no longer fit. You try to hide this feeling because it seems strange. You ask yourself, am I just exhausted? Or am I changing for the worse? But then, as you sit in a familiar room surrounded by objects you have lived with for years, you realize that familiarity no longer gives you the sense of safety it once did. Something inside you has detached, a soft but persistent unfamiliarity, as if you are looking at your own life through a blurred layer of glass. And yes, this feeling is frightening, because it comes with a quiet fear that you are disappearing, that you are no longer the person others know. Or worse, no longer the person you know. But you know what? That very moment of fear is the clearest sign that you are stepping into a new chapter of your life. You are not broken. You just no longer belong to the old version of yourself. Think back to a time when you suddenly found it hard to stay present in conversations with people who were once very close. They talked about things that used to make you laugh, but for some reason, you only wanted to stay quiet. Not because you were bored with them, but because you no longer saw yourself in those stories. Or perhaps you played a song you once listened to hundreds of times, and instead of the familiar emotional spark, all you felt was distance, as if that song belonged to a version of you that no longer exists. This unfamiliarity, according to Jung, is a sign that the persona is beginning to crack. The persona, the mask each person must wear to function in society, once helped you fit in, helped you be liked, helped you stay safe. But at some point, that mask can no longer contain you. It isn't bad, it simply has expired. And you cannot keep living inside an old mold when your soul is outgrowing it. Jung said a line that I believe perfectly describes this stage. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming yourself has never been a journey that begins in bright light. It begins in ambiguity, in emptiness, in the feeling of losing connection to the things that once defined you. You can imagine this phenomenon like walking into an old house after many years. Everything is exactly where it always was. Yet in some inexplicable way, you no longer belong there. You know every corner, every crack in the wall, every slant of afternoon sunlight through the window. But you are not the person who once lived there. You do not hate that house. You have simply outgrown it. And when change happens inside, the outside world can no longer stay the same. What once made you happy no longer nourishes you. The old rhythms no longer match the new heartbeat within you. What you once pursued for approval now feels dull. What you once clung to for safety now feels heavy. Imagine you loved a movie so much that you watched it again and again, but by the 20th time, it no longer excites you. Not because the movie changed, but because you did. An old film cannot illuminate a new part of your soul. Similarly, many people once relied on anchor habits, a favorite cafe, a familiar playlist, a stable circle of friends. But when transformation begins, they discover they no longer feel connected to those places, not because they are ungrateful, but because their soul is opening a different door. I once spoke with a friend, someone deeply passionate about marketing, obsessed with analyzing customer behavior, thrilled by energetic pitching sessions. But one day, she told me, I don't know why, but this morning, when I opened my laptop, I couldn't recognize myself anymore. Everything she once treated as passion became a chain of meaningless tasks. But what fascinated me was not the career change that happened. Months later, she became a psychological counselor. But the way she described the shift, I realized I didn't lose myself. I merely stepped out of an older version. This is exactly what you are experiencing. This separation rarely happens all at once. It begins like a whisper in the unconscious, a vague sense that the old life no longer fits. But you suppress it, because humans fear change. Even fear losing an old version of themselves they no longer align with. But that whisper does not disappear. It grows, it sharpens, and at some point, you can no longer pretend you don't hear it. Have you noticed that the emptiness you fear might actually be the necessary space for something new to appear? When a room is too full, you cannot bring new things into it. And when your soul is packed tight with outdated roles, how can your true self speak? On this journey, you will begin to realize a few important truths. First, you are not lazy, lost, or unusually unmotivated. Second, the things that once made you happy no longer fit simply because you have grown beyond them. Third, you are not disappearing. You are reshaping. And most importantly, you are not broken. You just no longer belong to the old version of yourself. The beautiful part is, even when you don't yet know who you are becoming, your soul knows exactly what is no longer meant for you. Not every departure is a loss. Sometimes, it is only clearing the path. If you ask, so, how do I move through this phase without drowning in confusion? There are a few things you can begin right away. First, observe your unfamiliarity the way you observe weather. Don't fight it. Don't force yourself back into an old version just because it is familiar. Seasons arrive and leave in their own time. Next, pay attention to the things you no longer feel drawn to. Not to judge yourself, but to recognize that an ending is always the first sign of a beginning. A hobby turning empty is not a conclusion, it is an invitation. Finally, remember this. When the persona falls away, it always feels destabilizing, because you wore that mask for so long. It once helped you survive, helped you fit in, helped you be loved, but it cannot help you become the person you were born to be. In this separation, you are not losing yourself. You are simply moving closer to your truth. And that is the most beautiful sign you are entering a new phase. 1. Your soul has been preparing for a long time, waiting only for the moment when you are brave enough to see it. 3. When the soul calls you back to what is true. There are moments when you sit alone, looking at the life you have known for many years, and suddenly it feels as if an invisible door is opening somewhere deep inside you. It is not loud, it does not create dramatic upheaval, yet it makes you pause. A small pause, just enough for you to realize that something within you is rising, as if a long-forgotten part of you has just been awakened. It might be a childhood passion that once kept you awake at night, a dream you once dismissed as unrealistic, a tiny desire, but so honest that you are afraid to look directly at it. Or sometimes, it is that strange impulse that urges you toward an entirely new path, one you never thought you would try, and certainly never thought you deserved. And then you realize, passions have forgotten to return. New paths are opening. Relationships feel strained. Not all at once, but enough for you to know that a very deep layer inside you is shifting. Have you noticed? Things that once made you laugh, once made you feel like you belonged, no longer warm you the way they used to. Some friends, who were once close, suddenly feel distant, not because they changed, but because your heart is turning in another direction. Conversations that used to feel harmonious now feel like they no longer have a place to rest. You listen, but you no longer hear yourself in them. You smile, but you no longer feel the genuine connection behind that smile. This is not boredom. This is the restructuring of the inner world. When the inner world changes, all external connections change with it. Jung once said something perfectly suited to this stage: there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And indeed, when you begin to become aware of your true nature, the things that once represented you, that once were your emotional home, begin to shake, not to hurt you, but to help you recognize that you have grown beyond them. You are finding yourself again or discovering a version of you that you never allowed yourself to become. This phase often begins with a very subtle sign. For example, you open an old notebook where you once wrote your youthful plans and suddenly realize you once had dreams so beautiful they were almost naive. Your heart softens, or aches slightly. That ache is not regret. It is a signal. A part of you once lived very truthfully, and it wants to return. Or perhaps you are doing a stable, repetitive job, and one day, while sitting in a meeting, you look at the screen and feel tears wanting to rise. Not out of disappointment, but because you suddenly realize, this is no longer my path. But the important part is, you do not know what the new path is. You only know the old one is no longer yours. That is the soul's calling. The soul never shouts. It only whispers. And if you do not listen, it will not be angry. It will quietly repeat the signal through many forms: loss of interest, emptiness, unexplained fatigue, the urge to try something new, the discomfort of continuing to play an old role, until one day, you realize that the things that once made you feel you belonged now feel like forced performance. You say yes to invitations to meet, but your feet do not want to go. You converse, but your mind drifts away after the second minute. You try to reconnect as before, but your heart no longer responds. There are moments when you ask yourself, am I becoming difficult, withdrawn, or ungrateful for what I have? But the truth is simple. You are returning to what is true for you. And this shift is an invitation to return to your real self. The interesting thing is that when the self, the psychological center of who you are, begins pulling you toward it, nothing is actually lost, but simply shed. Things that are not truly yours can no longer cling to you, not because you intentionally release them, but because your new energy cannot hold what is no longer compatible. It is like upgrading the operating system of a phone. Some old applications stop running, not because they are bad, but because they are no longer aligned with the new system. Your soul works in the same way. A very ordinary moment, one you may have experienced yourself, is the story of a woman who spent more than 10 years pursuing a career in finance. She was talented, respected, but always carried a sense of imbalance inside. One day, she accidentally looked through the drawings she made as a child. In just a few seconds, the look in her eyes changed completely. Not because she decided to quit, to become an artist, but because she realized a very deep part of her was still alive, simply waiting to be called by its name. And do you know what happened? She did not quit her job immediately. She simply began drawing again, 1 hour every evening. 2 years later, she gradually became a freelance illustrator. She told me, "It wasn't that I found passion, but that passion found me." That is the essence of this sign. A forgotten part of you is beginning to return. Look back at yourself in the past few months. Is there something you once loved that no longer excites you? Is there something unfamiliar that is suddenly pulling you in? Is there a strange urge that makes you curious for no logical reason? Is there a relationship that suddenly feels faint, like early morning fog? If yes, then you are exactly where you need to be on this journey. The self is pulling you toward the psychological center of who you are, dismantling everything that is not your true you. Here is another thing you need to know. When you change the direction of your life, your relationships will be the first to react. Some will understand, some will not. Some will feel you becoming distant, and some will awaken deeper connections. You are not doing anything wrong. You are simply shifting your energetic frequency. Shallow conversations become empty. Relationships built on roles will collapse on their own. People who only knew your persona will not know how to step into your new version. And yes, that may make you sad, but that sadness is a necessary part of the return. You may ask, how do I know I'm going in the right direction? The answer is very simple. You will feel lighter. Even if you feel a bit lost, you will still feel lighter. Even if things are unclear, you will still sense that something is right. Even if nothing makes sense yet, your heart knows this. It is opening instead of closing. This change is an invitation to come back to your truth. If you want to navigate this stage gently, here are a few things you can try. First, do not force yourself to enjoy things you no longer enjoy. Emotions cannot be adjusted by logic. Let them guide you. Second, allow yourself to try new things, even if they are small. A craft class, a long walk, a different way of writing, a deep conversation with yourself. Third, observe what stirs something inside you. Sometimes that vibration lasts only a few seconds, but it is an important clue. Fourth, allow your relationships to change shape. Whoever remains will remain with the truest version of you. And finally, I want you to know this. No one returns to their true nature by accident. That journey always begins with an invisible signal, a calling only your soul can hear. If you are sensing that calling, don't doubt it. Let it lead you, because every calling leads you back to where you truly belong. And once you return to that place, your life will return to you as well, more beautiful, more genuine, and brighter than ever before. 4. When you begin to release what hurts you, there is a moment in life when you no longer want to argue, no longer want to prove anything, no longer want to explain, no longer want to force yourself into a version that is pleasant, safe, or acceptable to others. You simply want to be yourself calmly, quietly, without begging for anyone's approval. And the interesting thing is, that moment does not arrive with a loud explosion. It comes in stillness, a stillness that startles you. How exhausted have I become? You stop explaining, stop overgiving. You choose yourself because of the truth inside, not out of selfishness. This does not happen after a single argument or a painful comment, but after hundreds of times you tried to make others happy while your own heart was falling apart. One day, you wake up and realize there is nothing left to try for, not because you do not love them, but because you have finally learned how to love yourself. And this is exactly when you begin to release what hurts you. Letting go is never a gentle journey. It hurts, a very private kind of hurt, without a name, without a way to present it to anyone. Part of the pain comes from the fear of being misunderstood as ungrateful, cold, or selfish. But you know, anyone who has ever lived through this stage feels the same truth. This is not an act of rejection, but an act of self-rescue. Your clarity does not come from anger. It comes from a deep knowing that your energy is sacred, that your peace is non-negotiable, that your heart was never meant to hold abandonment, blame, or unpredictability. You no longer need to prove your worth in relationships that fail to see it. You no longer want to justify repeated behaviors that bruise your heart. You no longer want to beg for something someone has already chosen not to give. And most importantly, You no longer want to lose yourself just to hold on to something that is no longer meant for you. One thing you will notice right away in this stage is how your ability to see through everything becomes startlingly clear. Relationships you once convinced yourself were fine now feel undeniably strained. Conversations you once believed were intimate now feel like polite exchanges. Commitments you once felt obligated to carry now feel misaligned with the person you are becoming. You begin noticing the small things, the evasive glance, the sentence that makes your heart drop, the choices in which you were quietly dismissed. And then, as Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When you begin to illuminate what you once tried to ignore, you can no longer live as you did before. When the truth inside awakens, every outer illusion falls away on its own. The person at the center of this sign is someone who has grown too tired of performing a role just to be accepted and finally chooses truth over artificial harmony. Do you remember the times you tried to keep everything smooth? You bent further than you should have just to maintain peace. You gave more than you had just to keep someone close. You explained, and explained, hoping they would understand. But in return, you received silence. Or worse, disregard. Maybe you were told that you were too sensitive, expecting too much, or making things bigger than they are. But deep down, you knew the truth. All you ever wanted was to be treated with the basic kindness every human being deserves. And then, at a certain moment, you let go. Not to punish, not to prove anything, but because you understood that you could no longer dismantle yourself to hold on to something that no longer fits. You have the right to choose yourself without feeling guilty. This release does not only happen in relationships. It happens in every structure that once made you feel small. It may be the job you forced yourself to stay in because you feared you couldn't do anything else. It may be an old belief you clung to because change felt dangerous. It may be the role of the perfect child, the supportive friend, the patient lover, the understanding wife, the sacrificing husband. As it were, and when you let go of those roles, some people will react. Some will get angry because you are no longer as convenient as before. Some will feel abandoned because they were attached to your old version, the version that constantly tried to keep everything peaceful. But you know, their reaction does not reflect your worth. It reflects their dependency on the persona you have chosen to shed. This is the stage of shedding the persona, separating from the relational structures, beliefs, and roles that once obscured the self. Jung calls this the rebirth journey of the true self, a journey no one can take on your behalf. You must walk through yourself, leaving behind the mask you have worn for so long that you once believed it was your own skin. You may be asking yourself, after letting go, then what? What is left of me? That is the question almost every one of us must eventually face. The first thing you have left is space. Space in your mind, space in your heart, space to breathe, space to begin again. When you release what hurts you, you are freeing trapped energy. And the beautiful thing is, that energy returns to you stronger, clearer, more authentic. The second thing you have left is self-respect. You no longer accept disrespect from others. You no longer make excuses for behavior that wounds you. You no longer blame yourself for things beyond your control. The third thing you have left is the ability to see the truth. You clearly see who truly loves you, who only loves the convenient version of you, who only loves the benefits they gain from being near you. And finally, you are left with a heart that knows how to protect itself without becoming cold. A very real moment, one you may have seen somewhere within yourself, is the story of a friend I know. She was in a long-term relationship where she was always the one who understood, endured, and took care. But whenever she needed something, he was always absent. She explained many times, tried to talk, even wrote letters. In return, all she ever heard was, "You're making too big a deal out of this." One day, she no longer cried, no longer complained, no longer hoped. She simply fell silent, a silence that could not be undone. And after that, she left. What hurt her was not losing him. What hurt was realizing she had abandoned herself for far too long. But what made her proud was that for the first time in her life, she chose herself. And her life opened from that point on. Letting go is not the end. Letting go is a door. But this door only opens when you are brave enough to admit something you have known all along, that the truth inside matters more than artificial harmony on the outside. This journey will test you with very real emotions: loneliness, regret, fear of loss, discomfort. But each of these emotions is one more step, drawing you closer to the self, the brightest center within you. And when you walk through this stage, you will realize something that only those who have lived it can understand. Letting go is not because you no longer love. You let go because you have finally learned to love the right person yourself. You have the right to choose yourself without feeling guilty. And when you dare to choose this way, you have already stepped deeply into the path of transformation, a path where the best chapter of your life is waiting ahead. 5. When you grieve your old self and long to be alone, there are phases in life you cannot put into words. You are no longer who you used to be, but you also have no idea who you are becoming. You stand in a vague in-between space, as if life has just taken something deeply familiar from you, and you do not know whether you should hold on or let go. The feeling is like a strange kind of mourning a version of yourself that was once vivid and real, but somehow no longer belongs to you. You grieve your old self as if it were a past life. You find stillness in solitude. The saddest part is, you cannot tell anyone about this, because they will ask, is something wrong? While you yourself have no way to answer. How do you explain a change that happens quietly inside? Something that doesn't come from the outside world, doesn't come from an event, but from a deep inner shift? And amidst all the questions without answers, the only thing you want is to be alone, not to run away but to listen, to observe, to feel what is emerging in the gentle darkness of your inner world. This is not the loneliness of someone in despair. This is the solitude of someone shedding their old skin. Because solitude, in this moment, is the sacred space where the soul is reborn. One thing that makes this stage difficult to understand is the feeling of loss without an object. You didn't lose a lover, didn't lose family, didn't lose your job, yet your heart feels like it is in mourning. Mourning what? Mourning the version of yourself you must now part with. It is like a childhood journal you once adored, every page, every scribble, every memory. But when you open it again, you no longer see yourself in it. You do not hate it, do not deny it, do not erase it. You simply realize you are no longer that child. And that realization always comes with a quiet trembling. If I am no longer who I used to be, then who am I? Well, who am I? And Kainsing 20 rests to 70% for me. The one standing in this emptiness is someone whose soul is restructuring from the roots. At this point, you will begin to ask questions that feel unusual, questions you never dared to think before. Who am I without that role? What do I truly want, if it's not about pleasing anyone? 1. What kind of life honors the truth I feel inside? These questions may unsettle you, but the very fact that they appear is already an awakening. The soul only asks when it is ready to turn the page. And while you feel like you are falling into darkness, Jung said a line that can illuminate this exact moment. In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. You feel chaotic, but beneath that chaos, a sacred order is forming. A new version of you is about to be born. This is the long night of the soul before dawn arrives. You may notice small changes first. You no longer want to interact with too many people. Crowded places, shallow conversations, social pleasantries suddenly feel heavy. Not because you've become difficult, but because something delicate and fragile within you needs protection. You crave silence, as if it were a rare drink. You find peace in sitting alone, doing nothing. You want more time for reflection, for inner work, for hearing your own breath. And the strangest thing, you do not feel lonely. On the contrary, this solitude feels right. It fits you in a deeply instinctual way, as if your soul finally has space to breathe, to speak, to grow. I remember someone once told me she had always been the strong one in every relationship. She carried, healed, listened, managed, until she had no energy left to manage herself. And then one day, while laughing with friends, she realized something inside her had died, not because someone hurt her, but because she had stopped listening to herself for too long. Months later, she began withdrawing. She no longer cared for parties, no longer wanted to explain, no longer wanted to justify. She spent time writing, walking, sitting with thoughts she once avoided. She said, "I don't know who I'm becoming, but I know my old self cannot follow me into the future. That is the essence of this phase. You are not lost. This is the necessary stage for the soul to be reborn. This phase also makes you more sensitive to things that once hurt you. You no longer accept half-hearted interactions. You no longer have energy for empty conversations. You clearly know who truly cares, and who only cares when they need something from you. What once made you stay silent now makes you want to walk away. What once made you force a smile now suffocates you. What once made you try harder now makes you realize you've tried too much. You begin valuing clarity over comfort. You choose truth over ease. You choose being alone over pretending to connect. No one teaches you this. Your soul leads you here. When you are alone, your inner space begins to expand. You hear small sounds you once mistook for silence. You realize you have emotional layers that were never touched. You begin to remember things that once made you feel alive. The smell of the first rain, the afternoon sun through the window, the quiet joy of reading a book for no reason at all. You are not running from anything. You are returning to yourself. And in this return, you begin to realize that freedom is not the absence of responsibility. Freedom is the presence of alignment. It is being in the place your spirit calls you to be. It is no longer fragmenting yourself to please the world. Anything that fragments your spirit, that cracks your clarity, is slowly dissolving. You may think you are stepping backward, but in truth, you are stepping into the necessary ground for rebirth. Just as a seed must remain in the dark before rising into the light, your soul needs this emptiness to dissolve old structures and shape new ones. Honor this process. Grieve it if you must, but do not resist it. The more you surrender to what is leaving, the more space you create for what is coming. This is the mystery of thresholds, the space between identities, between lives. It is not loss, it is transition, a sacred opening, clearing the soil for new life to emerge. And then one morning, you wake up and find yourself breathing more easily, more lightly, more clearly. You feel new though not yet complete. You feel different though you don't know how different yet. You feel right, even if you can't explain it with logic. Because ultimately, you are moving through the long night of the soul to finally meet yourself whole, honest, and brighter than ever. You are not lost. This is the necessary stage for the soul to be reborn. 6. When intuition rises the moment, the old ego collapses. There are moments in life when you stand at a crossroads where no one can teach you which way to turn, where there is no map, no advice that feels convincing enough, and no rational system that functions fully. And yet, strangely, in that exact moment, something inside you leans toward one direction, as if pulled by an invisible force. There is no data, no analysis, only a feeling, a whisper, a nudge so insistent you cannot pretend you don't hear it. This is the phenomenon of the sixth sign, intuition flaring to life at the very moment your old ego cracks. And you know, this is not random at all. It is a psychological mechanism so deep that Jung had to admit that intuition is perception via the unconscious. When the old parts of you dissolve, the unconscious steps forward to guide you. This often happens when you feel you can no longer control the familiar elements of your life. Choices that once seemed obvious become unclear. Plans that once felt solid begin to wobble. Old ways of behaving no longer fit, and inside you, a part begins to panic. Our ego, as Jung described, always tries to maintain control, even through methods that no longer bring safety. So when it collapses, you feel relief and anxiety at the same time. Relief because you no longer have to uphold something outdated. Anxiety because you still do not know who you are becoming. But it is precisely this empty space that becomes the place where intuition rises strongest, like light breaking through the crack of a room that has been sealed for far too long. You may have felt this before, standing between two choices that look identical on paper, yet one option makes your chest expand while the other makes it heavy. Or trying to listen to the advice of others, but a quiet feeling in your gut pulls you in another direction. This is not impulsiveness. This is not imagination. This is the unconscious speaking. Intuition is the voice of the self, the deepest center of your soul, trying to lead you back to yourself. And it appears most powerfully when the layers of the persona, the roles you once wore, begin to fall away. When the old self no longer exists in a stable way, another voice rises to lead you toward truth. In this phase, the feeling of being pulled is very real. A person experiencing this sign cannot explain it with logic. yet cannot deny its strength. It feels like a current pushing you forward, toward something both strange and familiar, and you are confused because you have never lived under this form of guidance long enough to trust it completely. You are used to reason. You are used to analyzing. You are used to comparing. But at this moment, reason feels like an old lantern too dim to light your path. Meanwhile, intuition shines bright, like a sudden burst of light emerging from deep within. It does not speak in words. It speaks in sensations, in energy, in a form of knowing that needs no explanation. If you pay attention, you'll notice intuition rises most when you are exhausted from trying to keep everything the same, when you are too tired of maintaining worn-out relationships, staying attached to a job that no longer fits, or continuing to live according to someone else's expectations. The old ego built on image, roles, and habits is collapsing piece by piece. And when it no longer has the energy to function, another guidance system activates automatically. Just as your body enters survival mode when it loses balance, your soul does the same. When the old self can no longer carry you forward, intuition takes over. And it is precisely in these moments that you begin to recognize a truth you never dared to believe before. The voice you hear does not come from the outside. It comes from a deeper layer within you, a place where you are not wounded, not expected to perform, not conditioned. A place completely original. The self has always been there, watching you, waiting for you to become clear enough to listen. And every time the persona, the social mask, grows weary, the self steps forward. This is not simply an emotional moment. This is a restructuring of your entire psyche, something Jung described with remarkable precision. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Intuition flares because the ego is dissolving. That light is not here to destroy you. It is here to illuminate what in you has reached its time for transformation. To help you picture this more clearly, imagine someone who has stayed for many years in a relationship that no longer nourishes them. On the surface, they look fine. They do what they are supposed to do. They try to maintain peace, but deep inside, each day, a part of their soul weakens. One evening, while sitting quietly alone, they suddenly see with absolute clarity that they cannot continue like this. There is no major event, no argument, no decisive reason, just an inner knowing. And the truth is, that moment of clarity can be so strong that even they feel startled by their newfound decisiveness. That is intuition at work when the persona is no longer strong enough to cover the truth. People in this phase often share that they cannot explain why they want to change direction, walk away, switch jobs, let go, or start over. They only know that if they do nothing, they will betray themselves. That is the essence of the inner voice you must learn to trust. And here, the message you long to hear and deserve to hear is this: trust that voice. It is yours, you just have never listened long enough. This is not a pretty affirmation. It is a psychological truth. When the self leads, you no longer need anyone's approval to know you are on the right path. And when you begin trusting your intuition, everything around you starts to shift, not by magic, but by clarity. You will find that you no longer want to invest in things that are now only habits. You no longer want to maintain roles that no longer nourish you. You no longer want to chase what fragments you. A voice within you, calm yet powerful, begins to guide you toward something simpler, truer, more aligned. This is the moment many people mistakenly believe they are becoming lost. But the reality is the opposite. For the first time in a very long time, you are being guided by something that cannot be wrong. The interesting thing is, intuition never argues with you. It does not pressure you. It stands there quietly, like a door already open, waiting for you to be brave enough to step through. If you ignore it, it does not get angry, but it will not remain silent forever. It will return each time you collide again with the exhaustion of your old ego. And each time, it becomes clearer, more refined, not because it changes, but because you are changing. You are learning to recognize the voice of your soul amidst all the noise. This leads to the final truth. Intuition rises strongest when the old part of you is dying. And this death is not as frightening as you imagine. It is a release, an invitation to become a truer version of yourself. The old dissolves, so the real can appear. The persona fades, so the self can step forward. And the self never leads you into the wrong path, because as Jung once said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. When you hear the call from within, You are not simply changing, you are awakening. And the most important thing you must remember about this sixth sign is this: intuition does not appear to force you into immediate decisions. It appears to remind you that you are no longer alone in your journey. It appears to tell you that even when your mind trembles, your soul still knows the way. It appears to guide you through the most chaotic part of your transformation. So if you feel your old ego collapsing, and at the same time, a quiet voice beginning to lead you forward, know that you are in the right place, at the right time, in the right stage. Nothing is wrong with you. You are simply becoming more authentic. And if you can trust that even just a little, you will see the path ahead begin to glow in ways you never imagined. 7. When the things that once mattered suddenly feel empty. There will be phases in your life when you wake up and realize that everything that was once a milestone, a destination, a reason to live, now feels like nothing more than the hollow shell of an old life. The beliefs that once held you upright, the goals you once pursued with your whole heart, the habits that once gave you a sense of safety, all of them seem to have lost their pull. And you look at them, wondering, what has happened to me? This is the phenomenon of the seventh sign, the quiet dissolution of what once mattered, not because you have become indifferent, but because your soul is stepping across the threshold of a new stage. Jung once wrote, "All the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. And when you begin to outgrow your old life, the feeling of emptiness is inevitable." What confuses many people in this phase is not the dissolution itself, it is the fact that they do not feel the panic they thought they would. Instead, amidst major changes, amidst things falling away, you feel an odd calm, a stillness so deep it feels like it has been waiting a very long time to emerge. This is the sign of inner purification, the restructuring of the psyche, when it recognizes that the old frameworks can no longer contain the person you are becoming. This emptiness is not loss, it is clearing. It is the space your soul creates to prepare for a new cycle. You may find yourself standing in conversations that once delighted you, but now feel like repetitions of an old script. You pick up your phone to text someone, then put it down, realizing you no longer want to maintain connections just to fill a void. You look at schedules, goals, to-do lists, and suddenly realize they no longer hold the meaning you thought they did. Not because they are wrong, but because you have changed. And when you change, what once aligned with you must also be reevaluated. The person experiencing this sign feels as though life is dissolving layer by layer, yet instead of fear, they quietly observe, wondering why peace is arriving at the exact moment things seem to fall apart. In truth, this is the inner alchemy Jung spoke of, the disintegration of the old, so the new can emerge. Alchemy is not about turning lead into gold in the physical sense. It is the transformation of the raw parts of the soul into a purer, more mature form. And every alchemical process begins with dissolution. Nothing is wrong with you for no longer being drawn to what you once thought mattered. On the contrary, this is the signal that you are being led into the best phase of your life. What once motivated you may have fulfilled its purpose. What was once a dream may simply be the first version of something larger waiting ahead. Look deeply into this emptiness. It is not aggressive. It is not urgent. It is like clearing out an old room and being left with an open space. That open space is not loss. It is a promise. And within that space, you begin to ask questions. Questions you never dared to touch before because you were too busy living at someone else's pace. Now, you ask, does this still feel true for me? Does this value still nourish me? Am I living my life? These questions are not signs of crisis. They are signs of awakening. The beautiful thing is, when everything becomes empty, you begin to hear more clearly the things you once ignored. A small desire that flickers for a moment. A vague idea that finally becomes visible. A direction that once felt unreasonable now begins to make sense. This is not the mind's impulsiveness. This is the soul's calling. The old must break so this calling can echo. Many describe this feeling as returning home after a long journey, standing among familiar things but no longer feeling you belong to them. And that sense of displacement becomes the doorway back to your truest self. Let me say this clearly. You are not losing everything. You are being cleansed so you can step into what is more luminous. This is the message your soul has been trying to send all along. And it is absolutely right. When the things that once mattered no longer fit, it is the surest sign that your psyche has grown beyond the old mold. Jung once wrote, "We cannot change anything, unless we accept it. And facing this emptiness is your first act of acceptance. It allows you to change. It allows you to grow. In this process, you may feel like a piece of land that has just gone through harvest season. The weeds have been pulled. The soil has been turned. The surface looks bare. Yet deep beneath it, new life is preparing to rise. No one looks at a field after harvest and says it has died. They know it is simply getting ready for a new season. Your soul is the same. Emptiness is not an ending. It is a beginning. You may notice that relationships which once made you feel at home now feel heavy. Conversations that once came easily now feel like obligations. Hobbies that once brought joy now feel like you're replaying an old habit. This may lead you to believe you have become more difficult, harder to connect with. But the truth is, you are refining your energy. You are rejecting what no longer nourishes you. You are entering a stage where only what is real, what is deep, what is sincere, can walk beside you. This is not withdrawal. This is discernment, a natural kind of soul-level selection. And if inside you there is a strange calm even while everything around you is changing, know that you are not imagining it. That calm is evidence that you are in the right place. It is the feeling of a soul that knows it no longer fits within its old limits. It is the relief of shedding armor you no longer need. It is the exhale of a self that has waited a very long time to live truthfully. Do not rush to fill this emptiness. Do not rush to replace the old with something new simply because you fear the space. The space is the most important part. It is the door. It is the transition. It is the invitation. If you allow yourself to stay with it long enough, what is coming will find you. It never fails. And when you look back someday, you will realize that the phase you once thought was falling apart was actually the moment when everything inside you was being arranged correctly for the first time. You are not losing your life. You are reclaiming it. You are not shrinking. You are expanding. You are not being left behind. You are being prepared to step into the most radiant version of yourself. Trust this emptiness, because if you listen deeply enough, you will realize it is not the space of loss, it is the space of birth. As you move through these 7 signs, you will realize you are no longer standing at the starting point of the old, but you have not yet fully stepped into your new form either. You are standing at the threshold of transformation, where the soul begins rewriting its own map, and it is precisely this ambiguous moment that is the clearest proof you are getting closer to the life that truly belongs to you. But the journey does not end here, because once the old foundation falls away, 2 deeper movements await to be awakened, guiding you into your most luminous stage. If you are ready to open that door, comment, "I'm ready," so we can continue together. When life energy and creativity return, in this section, I want to talk to you about a very special moment. The moment when life energy begins to return after everything you have been through. I want you to recognize that if something inside you is vibrating with a new sense of aliveness, it is not a coincidence. Have you ever experienced this? On some morning, while making coffee, or looking at your reflection in the mirror, you suddenly realize that something inside you is moving again? Not restlessness, not crisis, but a very quiet, very clear, hard-to-name kind of urging. As if after years of living on autopilot, a part of you has just opened its eyes again. That is the moment life energy begins to return. And in the spirit of Jung, you can see this as the first sign that the self is restructuring you from within. Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." When life energy returns, it rarely arrives in the form of logic, plans, or strategy. It comes as a feeling that you need to do something, not for anyone, not to impress, but to answer a very personal necessity of the soul. You may find yourself wanting to change careers although no one understands why, wanting to learn a new skill that has nothing to do with your current work, wanting to return to something you abandoned halfway through your life. None of this is rebellion. It is the turning of your true nature. And the interesting thing is, this stage often comes after major breakdowns. After you have gone through the first 7 signs where the old falls away, where your old identity cracks, where purification happens silently, a large inner space appears. That very space is the most fertile soil for creativity. People who have gone through enough collapse often describe this moment with the sentence, "I just want my life back," but in a way that feels like me. They don't want to go backward. They want to be recreated. You may see yourself reflected in these very ordinary examples. A 52-year-old woman, after a divorce, suddenly wants to learn salsa dancing as a way to reclaim her body and her aliveness. A father who has gone through burnout suddenly wants to open a bakery, something he dreamed of at 20 but never dared to try. A man who has been an engineer for 3 decades wakes up one day wanting to become a counselor to help others walking through the same ruins he once did. These are all expressions of one process. Libido, the life energy, begins to be redistributed into areas you once abandoned. And you will feel it clearly. This impulse does not come from the ego wanting to prove something. It comes from a much deeper place. It is the creative instinct, the creative archetype that Jung described, the primal energy within us that always seeks to reshape life when the inner landscape is ready. You may feel yourself becoming excited by small things, buying the box of paints you once loved, looking into a new class, planning a personal project you never dared dream of. When the self rises, the world does not change, but you do. What matters is this. Do not mistake this movement for recklessness. Middle-aged people after deep wounding often fear making another wrong move. They fear they are simply overreacting. But in truth, this shift is not impulsive. It is the natural outcome of a soul shedding its outdated layers. You are revealing yourself to yourself. And that always comes with creativity, because creativity is the natural expression of a soul set free. This is why the message at this stage needs to be spoken clearly, so the listener feels understood. You are not rebelling. You are being reborn. A new life is opening not through loud destruction, but through quiet movement within. You begin to see life as a material you can shape, no longer as a prison you must endure. And that is a beautiful moment. The moment you realize life can still be beautiful in ways you never imagined. You may not know where you are going yet. You may only feel a soft trembling inside you in response to some potential change. And that is enough. Because when life energy returns, you do not need to see the entire path. You only need to take the first step. The rest, the self, will guide. If you are ready for this new chapter, say gently, I have returned to myself. When inner peace begins to form, when you've come this far, I want to talk to you about a very quiet yet deeply powerful transformation in the life of the soul. It is the moment you realize you no longer react the way you used to, no longer get shaken by things that once kept you awake at night, and no longer feel the need to fight everything just to survive. This is the landscape that many only reach after walking through a great deal of breaking, the landscape where true inner peace begins to take shape. Jung once wrote, in the stillness, the psyche finds its own path toward wholeness. When peace begins to form, it does not arrive like a surprising gift or a miracle that makes all your problems disappear. It arrives through the shift in the way you experience life. You no longer react out of habit. What once made you spring up to defend yourself now only makes you exhale. The arguments that once made your hands tremble with anger now feel not worth it. You find yourself choosing silence, not because you're weak, but because you understand what is truly deserving of your energy. This is the need that follows naturally after the first 7 signs, because anyone who has walked through deep inner changes eventually arrives at a common question. When do I get to feel peaceful? Those who have lived enough no longer seek dopamine in intensity. They seek dopamine in softness, in not having to brace themselves, in feeling enough, even when life hasn't yet fallen into place. And that is why this stage appears. It is the reward of someone who has dared to undergo the rebirth of their own being. You will notice very simple signs. You are not easily triggered anymore. A thoughtless comment from someone no longer pierces your heart. You no longer want to argue to win or explain to be understood. You hold your energy the way someone holds something precious, knowing it cannot be wasted on meaningless battles. Your mind becomes quiet, even when life is not. You become lighter, softer, and somehow steadier, in a way that is hard to describe. According to Jung, this moment marks the emergence of the transcendent function, the function that reconciles the 2 poles of the ego. It is the point where the dark and the light within you stop fighting. Persona and shadow no longer clash the way they used to. What you once avoided, you can now look at directly. What you once projected onto others, you now recognize as your own. Peace is not the absence of problems. It is the absence of inner resistance against yourself. You may see yourself in these everyday examples. A single mother who once erupted in frustration when her child resisted, now simply pauses and gently asks a question. A man who once felt insulted when rejected now smiles because he understands the rejection says nothing about his worth. An office worker who once trembled whenever she was evaluated now feels an unexpected calm, as if others' judgments are only distant echoes unable to reach the core of who she is. And do you know what makes this stage sacred? It is the realization that peace is not something you find, it is something you become. It is the moment your soul becomes mature enough to hold itself, no longer waiting for anyone to save you, no longer needing anyone to understand you. You become the home you have always been searching for. When peace begins to form, you will also notice changes in how you act day to day. You know how to set boundaries gently but clearly. You choose conversations that lift you up instead of draining you. You begin to prioritize sleep, stillness, and the things that make you feel more connected to yourself. Life is no longer a series of fires to put out. It becomes an ongoing process of caring, arranging, and nourishing. Interestingly, this is also the stage where many people first experience what it feels like to live from the self, no longer from fear. You stop trying to prove yourself. You stop chasing borrowed measures of success. You live from your true essence, and that creates an inner spaciousness so calm, it feels miraculous. You realize that true awakening does not lie in explosive moments, but in the stillness, after all the upheaval, where you can finally hear what you want, who you are, and which path is truly yours. And perhaps the most important thing I want you to remember is this. This piece is not the ending. It is the foundation on which you will build the most beautiful part of your life, the part where you live not to escape something, but to receive something far more worthy. If you are feeling this quieting inside yourself, then know this. You are standing at the exact right place in the journey. You have come farther than you think, and the peace you feel now is not temporary. It is the birth of the person you are becoming. When you look back at all the signs you've just walked through, I believe you can feel clearly that real transformation is never loud. It unfolds quietly in every choice you make, every emotion that shifts, every moment you listen to yourself a little more deeply. This is not a journey of becoming someone else, but the journey of returning to who you have always been. And if you find yourself in any of these signs, then congratulations, you are not lost. You are stepping into the best stage of your life. And now, I want to invite you to do this for yourself. Keep nurturing that awareness. Let this journey go beyond listening to a video and become the way you live every single day. I truly want to know your thoughts. Which sign are you in among these 7? And what resonated with you the most? Share it in the comments. I read every word. If you found this video helpful, please hit like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who might need a gentle reminder of their own growth. I'll see you in the next chapter of the journey.